I never expected my boredom to lead to something like this. I guess it's my fault for messing around on the dark web in the first place, but I was curious. You know how it is, scrolling through Reddit, hearing about how dangerous the dark web can be, drug deals, hitmen, all that crazy stuff. But what nobody ever talks about is the people you meet there, or more specifically, the ones who seem normal at first. It all started a couple of months ago. I've been on the dark web for a few weeks, mostly browsing. I wasn't doing anything too sketchy, just digging through forums, finding weird threads. I found this one called Shadowed Mirrors, which sounded spooky, but when I clicked on it, it was just a place where people shared personal stories, creepy experiences they'd had, strange occurrences in their lives. It wasn't anything supernatural, but the tone was darker than your average Reddit thread. That's where I met him. I'll call him Luke. He messaged me first after I posted a story about finding an old VHS tape in my parents' attic that showed footage of me as a child, except I had no memory of the events on the tape. Luke commented something cryptic like, "It's weird what our minds can bury." I replied, thinking he was just one of those wannabe philosophical types, but we started chatting from there. At first, Luke seemed like a decent guy. He told me he was in his late 20s like me, and we bonded over a shared love of horror movies. We spent a couple of nights trading recommendations, talking about obscure films we'd seen. But after a few days, the conversation shifted. He started talking about the dark web more, how deep you could really go. Luke claimed that most people only scratch the surface, that there were layers to it you'd never want to find yourself in. And then he asked me something strange. Have you ever heard of the Mirror Gate? I hadn't. I tried to Google it, but there was nothing, at least not on the normal web. When I told him I couldn't find anything, he laughed and sent me a link. Against my better judgment, I clicked it. I swear my computer glitched the second I did. My screen flashed, the mouse froze for a second, and then it opened a chat room. I know I should have stopped there. I should have closed the browser and forgotten all about Luke, but curiosity had me by the throat. The chat room was strange. It was like any other forum, but something felt off. The usernames weren't just random handles, they felt more like descriptions. Watcher 237, worm food, sleepless entity. And then there was Luke's, whispers in the walls. It gave me the creeps. The conversations in that room were twisted. People weren't just sharing scary stories, they were talking about doing things, dark things, real things. I remember reading a post where someone described a ritual they performed that involved a pig's heart and a newborn's footprint. It was sick, but Luke was acting like it was normal. The weirdest part? He kept pushing me to get more involved. He sent me these cryptic messages saying things like, "You're almost ready," and "It's in your blood." I laughed it off at first, thinking he was just trying to spook me, but as the days went by, things started getting weirder. Luke's behavior changed. He began sending me voice messages instead of texts. And those messages, they were hard to listen to. His voice was different, strained, like he was forcing the words out. In one message, I could hear someone else whispering in the background, like multiple voices were talking at once, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I asked him about it, and he told me he was just experimenting with sound, but I didn't buy it. Something was off with him, something wrong. Then the hallucinations started. At first, I thought I was just sleep deprived. I'd been staying up late chatting with Luke, going down dark web rabbit holes, and my sleep schedule was wrecked. But it wasn't just exhaustion. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye, shadows moving, figures standing at the edge of my vision, disappearing when I turned to look. My computer screen would flicker, showing brief images that were gone too quickly for me to understand. Faces, distorted faces. But the worst part was the dreams. I started having nightmares every night. Horrible, violent nightmares. In one, I was strapped to a chair in a basement, unable to move, while Luke stood over me with a knife, slowly carving symbols into my skin. I woke up drenched in sweat, but the pain in my arms felt real, like the dream had crossed into reality. When I checked, there were no marks, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in me. The final straw was the video Luke sent me. It was about a week ago, late at night. My phone buzzed, and there was a message from Luke. "Watch this, alone." It was a video file. No explanation, just a blank message with the file attached. I hesitated. Every part of me knew I shouldn't open it, but by then, I felt like I didn't have a choice. It was like Luke had wormed his way into my mind, into my life, and I had to know what he wanted me to see. So I opened it. The video started with static, but after a few seconds it cut to footage of a room, just a normal, dimly lit room, except for one detail. There was a body in the middle of the floor, a man. He was lying face down, completely still. Then, slowly, his body started to twitch. At first it was subtle, but then his movements became more violent, like he was having a seizure. I was about to turn it off when the man rolled over. It was Luke. His eyes were wide open, but they weren't right. They were completely black, like something had replaced them. His mouth was moving, but no sound was coming out. He started clawing at his skin, tearing at his arms, his face, ripping himself apart. And then he smiled. He stared right at the camera and smiled, blood dripping down his face, his teeth shattered from whatever he'd been doing to himself. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. The screen cut to black, but that smile, it's burned into my mind. I can still see it when I close my eyes. After that, I stopped responding to Luke. I blocked him on every platform, deleted every trace of our conversations, but I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. I keep hearing noises at night, scratching at my windows, whispers coming from the hallway, and then last night I found something scratched into my bedroom door. A single word. Ready? I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm scared. I don't know if Luke was possessed, or if something far worse is happening, but whatever it is, I think it's coming for me next. After I posted the first part, I started getting weird messages from random accounts on Reddit, people with usernames I didn't recognize. At first I brushed them off, but then one of them sent me a direct message saying, "You're not alone, we see you." I tried not to freak out. I thought it was just a troll who read my post, but then the messages kept coming. Each one was more specific, like they knew details about my life they shouldn't. Someone sent me a photo of my house. Not a Google Maps screenshot, but an actual photo, taken from across the street. My front door was slightly open in the picture, and my stomach dropped because I hadn't left it that way. I ran to the door expecting to find someone inside, but when I got there, everything seemed normal. I searched the house top to bottom but found nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That's when the dreams got worse. I know I mentioned the nightmares in the first part, but now they feel more like memories than dreams. They're not just flashes of horror anymore, they're full scenes, vivid and too real for my mind to just be making up. One night I dreamed I was back in the chat room Luke showed me, but this time I was in the room, not just watching it through my screen. I was standing in a circle with people I didn't recognize, but somehow I felt like I knew them. In the middle of the room was a body, again, face down, like in the video. I don't want to describe what happened next, but we all did things. Horrible things. Things I didn't think I was capable of. And the worst part? I felt calm. Numb, even. Like it wasn't a nightmare, but something I had done 1,000 times before. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I couldn't get the images out of my head. I spent the whole next day pacing around my apartment, trying to convince myself that it was just a dream. But then, something happened that made me question whether any of this was in my control. I found dirt under my fingernails. It wasn't just a little bit. It was caked under there, like I had been digging in the ground. I never go outside. I live in an apartment with no backyard, no garden. So where did the dirt come from? I tried washing it off, but it wouldn't come out right away. The smell too, like wet earth and something else, something rotten, lingered no matter how many times I scrubbed my hands. That night, I heard footsteps in my apartment. Not from the hallway, not from my neighbors. Inside my apartment. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and crept through the rooms, checking every corner, every closet. The whole place was empty, but the footsteps kept coming, circling around me, echoing through the walls. Then the whispering started again. It was faint at first, like a low hum just outside my hearing range, but it got louder as the night went on. Words I couldn't understand, spoken in a language that didn't sound human. And worse, something was banging on the windows. But when I checked, there was no one there. I tried calling the police, but halfway through dialing, the line cut off. No signal, nothing. I swear to God, when I looked back at my phone, there was a message from an unknown number. No one can help you. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in my living room, staring at the front door, waiting for something to happen. Morning came and nothing did. But I knew whatever this was, it wasn't over. The next day I went through my computer, deleting everything, every file, every trace of Luke, every link he ever sent me. But while I was clearing out my browser history, I found something I hadn't seen before. A folder buried deep in my hard drive labeled Whispers in the Walls. I had never made it, never downloaded anything like it. My hands were shaking when I opened it. Inside were pictures, hundreds of pictures, of me. They were all of me in different places, my apartment, my street, even my bathroom. I couldn't understand it. How the hell had these photos been taken? I live alone. No one else has access to my place. But then I found the videos, short clips, maybe 10 or 15 seconds each, of me sleeping. Someone had been in my apartment, standing over me, recording me as I slept. I threw up. My whole body went cold, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. I watched the videos over and over, hoping to catch a glimpse of who was doing this, but they never showed up on camera. It was like they were just invisible. All I could see was me, completely vulnerable, completely unaware that someone had been inches away from me, watching me. I tried to report it to the police, but when I got to the station, they told me they couldn't do anything about it. They didn't even look at the photos or videos. The officer I spoke to just shook his head and said, "Maybe you should stay off the internet for a while." I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to grab him by the collar and show him the evidence, make him understand that something was wrong. But I didn't. I left, defeated. That night, things escalated. I was in bed trying to keep myself from spiraling when I heard it again, those footsteps, heavy and slow, like someone was walking deliberately through my apartment. I didn't move. I just lay there, listening, hoping it would stop. But it didn't. The footsteps got closer and closer until I could hear breathing just outside my bedroom door. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it would go away, but then the door creaked open. I couldn't bring myself to look. My body was paralyzed with fear. I felt the presence in the room with me, standing at the foot of my bed. The air got cold like I'd stepped into a freezer, and that smell, rotting earth, decay, it was overwhelming. Then, in the silence, I heard Luke's voice. "You're almost ready." I opened my eyes, but there was no one there. The door was still open, but the room was empty. Yet I could feel it. Something had been in there with me, watching me sleep again, whispering those words in my ear. The next morning, I woke up with scratches on my arms. Deep, red lines, like something had clawed at me in my sleep, but they weren't random. They were symbols, the same ones from my dream. I don't know what's happening to me, but I feel like I'm losing control. My thoughts aren't my own anymore. Every time I close my eyes, I see that room again. The circle, the body, the things we did. I can't keep doing this. I don't know if I'm going crazy or if Luke really is possessed or if something else has taken over, but whatever it is, it's not stopping. It's only getting worse. And I don't know how much longer I can fight it. After the scratches showed up, I knew I had to do something. There was no way I could keep living like this. I hadn't slept in days, barely ate, and my mind felt like it was tearing itself apart. I kept thinking back to what Luke had said, the last thing I heard in my room. "You're almost ready." Ready for what? I had no idea, but I knew it wasn't anything good. I decided to stay with my friend Mike for a few days. I didn't tell him the full story. How could I? I just said I was having some issues at home, weird stuff going on that I couldn't explain, and I needed to crash on his couch for a while. Mike's a good guy. He didn't ask too many questions. He just said, "Yeah, man, no problem. Stay as long as you need." The first night at Mike's place, I felt safer. His apartment was normal, no weird shadows, no whispers in the walls, and most importantly, no Luke. I started to think maybe I was just losing my mind, like maybe this was all some kind of psychotic break from stress or lack of sleep. I figured I'd stay at Mike's for a bit, clear my head, and everything would go back to normal. But that's when the texts started. I was lying on the couch, trying to fall asleep when my phone buzzed. I assumed it was some spam or a notification from one of the many apps I hadn't bothered to delete. But when I looked, my blood ran cold. It was a text from an unknown number. No name, just a simple message. "Why did you leave?" I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. It had to be Luke. I blocked every way he could contact me, but somehow he had found a way to get through. I thought about ignoring it, but something inside me, a curiosity, a pull I couldn't explain, made me respond. "Who is this?" Immediately, the typing bubble appeared, and a message came through. "You know who." I wanted to throw my phone across the room, but I couldn't look away. I typed again, faster this time. "Leave me alone." The response came almost instantly. "You can't run. It's in you now." That was it. I turned off my phone, shoved it under the couch cushion, and tried to push it out of my mind. Maybe if I ignored it long enough, this would all just stop. But the next morning, when I checked my phone, the message was still there, along with a new one. "Come home." I didn't go home. I refused to. The next few days at Mike's were rough. I barely slept, my anxiety was through the roof, and I kept feeling like I was being watched. I didn't tell Mike about the texts. I didn't want him thinking I was crazy. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was closing in on me, like it was only a matter of time before whatever Luke had planned actually happened. It got worse when I noticed something odd in Mike's apartment. I was sitting on the couch one afternoon, flipping through channels mindlessly, trying to distract myself when I heard it. That same faint whispering I'd heard in my own apartment. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but then it got louder. I muted the TV and listened. The whispers weren't coming from inside the apartment, they were coming from behind the walls. I shot up, trying to figure out where it was coming from, and that's when I saw it. In the corner of the room, there was a small mirror hanging on the wall. It wasn't unusual, just a cheap decorative mirror that Mike probably didn't even think about. But there was something wrong with it. The glass seemed darker than it should have been, like it was absorbing the light instead of reflecting it. And behind the glass, I swear I saw something moving. I walked up to it slowly, my heart racing, and when I got close enough I could make out a shape. It wasn't clear, but there was definitely something, or someone, on the other side of the glass, watching me. I reached out to touch it, and the second my fingers grazed the surface I heard Luke's voice. "Come home!" I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the coffee table. I tore the mirror off the wall and threw it into the corner. Mike came out of his room, asking me what the hell was going on, but I couldn't explain it. I couldn't tell him what I saw because I didn't even understand it myself. All I knew was that Luke, or whatever was inside him, wasn't just in my apartment anymore. It was following me. That night, I didn't sleep at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the mirror, saw that thing behind the glass, watching me. And then, around 3 a.m., I got another text. This time, it wasn't from an unknown number. It was from Mike's phone. "I'm waiting." My stomach dropped. I knew it wasn't Mike. I could hear him snoring in the other room. I slowly picked up my phone and checked the message again. "I'm waiting." I was about to wake Mike up when I heard it. The front door creaked open. I froze. I knew I'd locked it when we went to bed. Slowly I got up, grabbing the knife from the kitchen that Mike kept on the counter. I crept towards the door, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear myself think. The door was cracked open, just an inch, but enough for me to know that someone, or something, had come inside. I peeked through the crack and saw him. Luke was standing in the hallway, just outside the door, staring at me with those same black, hollow eyes from the video. He wasn't smiling this time. His face was twisted in a way that didn't even look human, like his skin was pulled too tight over his skull. His clothes were filthy, covered in dirt and dried blood, and his hands. God, his hands were soaked in something fresh, something red. He raised one of his hands and scratched at the door, like an animal trying to get in. "You're almost ready," he said, his voice low and guttural, like it wasn't even him talking. "Come home." I slammed the door shut and locked it, backing away as fast as I could. I heard footsteps pounding down the hallway, but when I looked through the peephole, there was no one there. I ran to Mike's room and shook him awake, yelling for him to call the cops. He was groggy, confused, but when he saw the look on my face, he grabbed his phone. I didn't tell him what I saw, just that someone had broken in. The cops showed up about 10 minutes later, but by then there was no trace of Luke, no signs of a break-in, nothing. But I knew what I saw, and I knew this wasn't over. The next morning, Mike went to work, and I told him I'd be fine staying at his place for a bit longer. He didn't question it, but I could tell he was starting to get worried about me. Hell, I was starting to get worried about me. I couldn't tell if this was real anymore, or if I was just losing my mind. I spent the whole day sitting on the couch, staring at that corner where the mirror used to be, waiting for something to happen. My phone buzzed again, and I didn't even want to check it, but I couldn't help myself. Another text. This time, it just said, "Tonight." I don't know what's coming, but I can feel it. Something is happening, something I can't stop. And I'm terrified that when it comes, I won't be able to fight it anymore. I could feel the weight of dread sitting on my chest all day after I got that text. Tonight. I didn't know what was coming, but deep down, I knew it was something I couldn't avoid. Every hour that passed felt like a countdown. I kept checking my phone, half expecting more messages, but there was nothing. Just the eerie, oppressive silence, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I decided to leave Mike's place. I didn't want to drag him into this mess any further, and honestly, I couldn't stand the idea of being around anyone when it came. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening was personal. This was about me and whatever Luke, or whatever he had become, wanted from me. I texted Mike, telling him I was heading back to my apartment, and packed my stuff as quickly as possible. I didn't give him an explanation. I didn't want to lie to him, but I also couldn't explain what I'd been dealing with. How could I? Even I didn't fully understand it. When I got back to my apartment, the first thing I noticed was the smell. It hit me the second I opened the door, a mix of rotting flesh and damp earth. It was so thick I gagged, almost threw up right there in the hallway. I knew I should have turned around and left, but some part of me couldn't. Some part of me needed to face this, to end it. The apartment was dark, even though it was only early evening. All the lights were off, but I hadn't left them that way. I walked in slowly, feeling like every step was dragging me deeper into something I couldn't escape. The air was freezing, much colder than it should have been. I could see my breath as I exhaled, and I knew something was wrong. The first thing I saw was the mirror. It was sitting in the middle of the living room floor, propped up against the wall. But it wasn't the same mirror I'd thrown in the corner at Mike's place. No, this was a different one, bigger, older, with cracks running through the glass. And behind those cracks, I could see it again. The shape. The thing watching me. It wasn't Luke, at least not the Luke I knew. It was something darker, twisted, like whatever had taken over him was staring back at me through that glass. Its eyes were black, hollow voids, and its skin was stretched tight over its bones, just like I'd seen in the hallway at Mike's. But now, it was clearer, more present, like it wasn't just behind the glass anymore. It was coming through. I backed away, my heart racing, but the smell... God, the smell was getting worse. I turned around and nearly passed out from what I saw next. There were symbols all over the walls, drawn in blood. I don't know whose blood it was, but it wasn't dry. It was fresh, dripping down the walls, forming patterns I couldn't even begin to understand. Circles, triangles, strange shapes that didn't make sense, but I knew they were part of something ancient, something wrong. And then I heard it. The whispering. Not in my head this time, but in the room. It was everywhere, echoing off the walls, growing louder and louder until it felt like the whole apartment was vibrating with the sound. It wasn't just one voice anymore. It was a chorus, hundreds of voices, all speaking at once, all saying the same thing. Ready. I stumbled back, tripping over the coffee table, and fell to the floor. The room was spinning. The symbols on the walls seemed to shift, to move, as if they were alive, breathing. I crawled backwards until my back hit the wall, trying to catch my breath, but it felt like the air was being sucked out of the room. That's when I saw him. Luke was standing in the doorway, staring at me with those black, hollow eyes. He wasn't moving, just standing there like a puppet waiting for strings to pull him. But then slowly, his mouth started to move. "You're ready." I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My body was frozen in place as Luke walked towards me, his movements jerky, unnatural, like something else was controlling him. His clothes were filthy, covered in that same dirt and blood from before, but his face was even worse than I remembered. His skin was stretched so thin that I could see the bones underneath, his lips cracked and bleeding. And his smile, God, that smile was wrong. It was too wide, too twisted.
"You know what to do," he said, his voice not entirely his own. It was deeper, layered, like multiple voices speaking at once. "You were chosen." Chosen for what? I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. Luke, or whatever had taken over him, laughed. It was a sound that made my skin crawl, like nails on a chalkboard mixed with the sound of someone choking. "For the ritual," he said, stepping closer. "It's always been you." I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but my body wouldn't cooperate. I was trapped, pinned against the wall by something I couldn't see, something stronger than me. Luke knelt down in front of me, his face inches from mine. His breath smelled like death, like rotting flesh, and I gagged again, trying to turn my head away. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he whispered, his lips barely moving. "The mirror shows you what you're hiding, the things you buried deep." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "I don't know what you're talking about." But I did. I knew. The nightmares. The dreams that felt more like memories. The symbols on the walls that had appeared in my skin. I had been part of this before, hadn't I? In that room, in those visions, doing things I didn't want to remember, things I couldn't let myself remember. But now, it was all coming back. "You'll lead us," Luke said, his voice soft, almost tender. "You were meant to. It's in your blood." I felt his cold hand on my arm, and I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come out. He leaned in closer, so close that I could see every crack in his lips, every tear in his skin. "You've already started," he whispered, his breath ice cold against my ear. "You don't remember yet, but you will." That's when I noticed the knife in his hand. It was long, thin, and covered in symbols just like the ones on the walls. I don't know where it came from, but I knew what he wanted me to do with it. I could feel the pull, the compulsion, the need to take it, to finish what had been started. "Take it," he said, holding the knife out to me. "You know what comes next." I stared at the blade, my hand trembling as I reached for it. Every part of me was screaming to stop, to run, to fight back, but I couldn't. My hand wrapped around the handle, and as soon as I touched it, I felt a surge of power run through me. The whispers got louder, more insistent, like they were cheering me on. "Do it," Luke said, his smile widening. "Complete the ritual." I raised the knife, my mind a blur of panic and fear, but there was something else too, something darker. A part of me that wanted this, that needed this. The part of me that had been buried for so long, now clawing its way to the surface. But just as I was about to bring the knife down, something stopped me. A flash of memory, a face, my face covered in blood. And then I heard it. A voice. Not Luke's, not the whispers, my own.
Stop. It was barely a whisper, but it was enough. My hand froze, the knife trembling in the air. I looked down at Luke, at his twisted, unnatural face, and I saw something in his eyes. Fear. "You're not ready," he whispered, his smile faltering. "Not yet." And then, just like that, he was gone. The room went silent. The symbols on the walls stopped moving. The mirror was gone, the air warm again like nothing had ever happened. But I knew this wasn't over. I didn't leave my apartment for days after that. I barely ate, barely slept. And when I did, it was only for a few minutes at a time, jolting awake, expecting to see Luke's twisted face standing over me again. But every time I opened my eyes, there was only silence. The mirror was gone. The symbols had faded. But the feeling, that creeping sense of being watched, of something waiting just outside my reach, never left. I tried telling myself that maybe it was over, that whatever ritual Luke was trying to force me into had been stopped, but I knew better. I could feel it inside me, like a ticking time bomb. I wasn't safe. I wasn't free. I was just waiting for the next phase. It wasn't until a week later that I realized how far this thing had gone. I hadn't spoken to anyone since I left Mike's, but I figured I should check in, let him know I was okay. When I called, though, he didn't answer. I thought maybe he was just busy or at work, but then a second call went straight to voicemail, and then a third. Something wasn't right. I drove to Mike's place, heart pounding the entire way. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to find, but a knot of dread tightened in my stomach with every block I passed. When I got to his apartment building, I went straight up to his door, knocking loudly. No answer. I tried the handle, half hoping it was locked, but to my horror it wasn't. The door swung open easily, like it had been waiting for me. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Rot. That same awful, rotting stench that I'd smelled in my own apartment. It was worse here, though, thicker, almost suffocating. I gagged, pulling my shirt up to cover my nose, and stepped inside. The place was dark. All the lights were off, but sunlight barely filtered in through the blinds. I called out to him, but no one responded. As I walked further into the apartment, I started to notice things were wrong. The coffee table was knocked over, the cushions on the couch were slashed open, and the walls had scratches, deep, jagged lines like someone had raked their nails across the paint. It looked like an animal had torn through the place, but the worst part was that it wasn't just the furniture. There was blood. Small drops at first, splattered on the floor, but as I walked further down the hallway, the drops turned into smears, handprints, streaks, like someone had been dragged. My pulse quickened, and I forced myself to keep going, even though every part of me was screaming to get out. When I reached Mike's bedroom, I froze. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see something sticking out, a foot. "Mike?" I whispered, my voice shaking. I pushed the door open the rest of the way, and my stomach dropped. Mike was lying on the floor, his body twisted unnaturally, covered in blood. His eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling, but there was something wrong with them. They were completely black, just like Luke's. I stumbled back, barely able to hold myself together. There were symbols carved into his chest, the same ones that had appeared on my walls, the same ones I'd seen in my dreams. They were etched deep, jagged, like someone had taken their time with him. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were rooted to the ground, my mind spinning with horror and disbelief. That's when I heard it again, the whispering. At first I thought it was in my head, but then I realized it was coming from the corner of the room. Slowly, I turned, and there it was, the mirror. I hadn't brought it with me. I hadn't touched it since that night, but there it was, propped up against the wall in Mike's bedroom. The glass was cracked, just like before, and behind the cracks, I could see that shape again. But this time, it wasn't just a shadow, it was Luke. He was standing behind the glass, staring at me with those black hollow eyes, his mouth twisted into that awful smile. But now, he wasn't alone. There were others with him, figures,
twisted and distorted, their faces blurred, their bodies flickering in and out of focus, and all of them were whispering, "You're ready." I backed away, my heart racing, but it was like the room had closed in around me. The door slammed shut, and the air grew cold. My breath came out in white puffs, and I could feel something crawling under my skin, something moving, growing inside me. I looked down at my arms and saw them, those same symbols, the ones carved into Mike, the ones from my nightmares. They were appearing on my skin, one by one, as if they were being burned into me from the inside. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and I could hear Luke's voice above them all. "Finish it." I dropped to my knees, clutching my head, trying to block out the noise, but it was everywhere. It was inside me. The knife, that knife, was lying on the floor in front of me, the same one Luke had handed me before. I didn't know how it got there, but I knew what they wanted. "Finish it," Luke repeated, his voice echoing through the room. "It's in you. It's always been in you." I grabbed the knife, my hands shaking, and looked at Mike's body. The blood, the symbols, it all felt too familiar, too real. And then it hit me, the memories flooding back, clearer now than ever before. This wasn't the first time. I'd done this before. I wasn't just a victim of the ritual, I was part of it. I had been part of it all along. The dreams, the nightmares, they weren't just hallucinations, they were memories. I had led them before. I had finished the ritual before, and now it was happening again. "No!" I screamed, dropping the knife. "I won't do it! I won't!" The whispering stopped. For a moment there was silence. Then Luke's face twisted, his smile fading into a scowl. "You have no choice," he said, his voice cold. "It's already done." I felt it then, a surge of energy, a cold, dark force rushing through my body. I tried to fight it, but it was too strong. My limbs went numb and the room spun around me. The symbols on my skin burned hotter, brighter, and I could feel my mind slipping away, like I was being pulled under by something far darker than I could comprehend. I looked up at the mirror one last time, and Luke was still there, watching me, his smile returning. But now, I could see it clearly. The thing behind him, the thing that had taken over him, and was now taking over me. I was becoming it. I was becoming him. As the darkness swallowed me, the last thing I heard was the whispering, softer now, almost gentle. "You're ready."